Be in Psalm 120 this morning. Psalm 120. The title of this psalm is given a song of degrees. We're going to see that that's going to be consistent all the way through Psalm 134. Historically, traditionally, these 15 psalms, Psalm 120 to 134, were sung by the Jews as they would go up to Jerusalem during the time of the Feast of the Tabernacle, or the Passover. Any time that they would come to Jerusalem for a specific religious feast, these would be the psalms that were sung. And they're meant to evoke a degree of ascension, because as you go to Jerusalem, you remember every time in Scripture that they talk about going to Jerusalem, it's always talking about going up to Jerusalem. That's because they're headed up. That's because it's typically you're on a lower sea level or a lower elevation, closer to sea level, and then Jerusalem's farther up above sea level. It's in the mountains. You have to go up. And so these are sometimes called songs of ascension. This is, Psalm 120 is typically the psalm that's sung whenever you begin or you depart from your destination, or shortly after departing from your destination as you begin your march to Jerusalem. Starting in verse 1, it says, "In my distress I cried unto the Lord, and he heard me. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue. What shall be given unto thee, or what shall be done unto thee, thou false tongue? Sharp arrows of the mighty, with coals of juniper. Woe is me that I sojourn in Meshech, that I dwell in the tents of Kedar. My soul hath long dwelt with him that hateth peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war." Now, we'll see that in Psalm 122, 124, and others as we go forward, that there will be a psalm that is not just a song of degrees, but it'll say a song of degrees of David, or it'll say a song of degrees for Solomon, a song of degrees of David. There are a few in there. This one is titled merely just a song of degrees. Some people have attributed it to David, but we don't exactly know. Some people, Bibles, study Bibles, when you look at the headings, when you look at the way they break things up, they break up Psalm 120 as if this was written by David around the time of the false witness of Doeg the Edomite, and say that when you see, "Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue. What shall be given unto thee, or what shall be done unto thee, thou false tongue," that he's actually talking about Doeg the Edomite, giving a false report on him to Saul. I don't really know if that lines up, and I'm not sure about that, but I just figured I would share it because some will equate it with that. So you can look further into that into your own studies. I'm not convinced, but maybe there's information out there that I didn't find. So back to verse 1. "In my distress I cried unto the Lord, and he heard me." So far away from Jerusalem, just departing, not near the Lord. You're working your way to march and walk toward the Lord, toward Jerusalem. You're far away, you're in distress. "In distress I cried unto the Lord, and he heard me. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue." And so, away from the Lord, away from his place, away from the place where he has set his name in Jerusalem, his tabernacle, his temple, it's difficult. And that's a picture of what it's like to be away from the Lord within your own life. That you're not near him, that you haven't drawn nigh to him, that you are living your life almost separately from him. But you've been in distress and you cry unto him, and you're drawing nearer to him. And And in that life, it is distressful to be away from the Lord. It is not peaceful. You're not going to get the peace of the Holy Spirit in your life if you're away from God. It's just not going to happen. If you miss church for 6 months in a row, if you get caught up in some habitual sin that you ought not to be caught up in, you're going to be far from the Lord. And that is a place, it definitely should be a place of distress. What shall be given unto thee, or what shall be done unto thee, thou false tongue, as we read verse 3. And so the psalmist and the singers of the psalm would be asking, what's going to happen with this deceitful tongue that is these lying lips that are trying to pull on me, that are trying to deceive me, that are trying to lie to me. It says, sharp arrows of the mighty with coals of juniper. And so we'll look quickly at Psalm 18. This is going to only take a couple minutes. Psalm 18. Psalm 18, starting in verse 8, it says, there went up a smoke out of his nostrils and fire out of his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also and came down. His darkness was under his feet, and he rode upon a cherub and did fly. Yea, he did fly upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness his secret place. His pavilion round about him were dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. At the brightness that was before him, his thick clouds passed, hailstones and coals of fire. The Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the highest gave his voice, hailstones and coals of fire. Yea, he sent out his arrows and scattered them, and he shot out his lightnings and discomfited them. And so, this was a psalm of David talking about the day of the Lord's deliverance from the hands of his enemies. And so he's giving praise and speaking grandly about the works of the Lord. And so, what shall be done unto thee, thou false tongue? Sharp arrows of the mighty with coals of juniper. And so that is the expectation, that God will rain down judgment upon his enemies, upon the enemies of the godly. Now, is that something that we can expect today in the church age? I think that you do see, and sometimes God does rain down judgment on the ungodly. I think that it's evident that happens at times. I think it's also evident that he also allows them to continue in their ungodliness at other times. And that we don't have a metric, we don't have a measuring stick for exactly explaining in which situations God allows it, in which situation God decides, no, it's time for judgment. We don't know his thoughts. We don't know his ways. What we do know is that when he makes a decision, it's the correct decision. And so we need to trust in him for that. What we also do know is that in this life, judgment may come to them, or it may not. But it will come at the end of their life. It will come nonetheless. For the ungodly, for the unsaved, for the wicked, judgment is not an if. It may be an if in this life. It may be a gamble if they want to do that in this life. But it's not an if for eternity. It's a win. It's a win. And so even if a deceiver comes after a Christian, or comes after, in this instance in Psalms, it would be an Old Testament saint, somebody who is within the nation of Israel prior to the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection. They may expect, because Israel, again, was given these physical promises. These physical promises of, if you follow me, if you are loyal to God, if you are faithful to his covenant, then you will reap physical prosperity within your nation. You will have these things. Look at the Ten Commandments. Honor your father and mother. And it's got a promise attached to it that the days of your life on this earth might be lengthened. Now, that's not exact words, that's a paraphrase, but it's attached with a promise. I don't know, and I think you would be hard up to demonstrate from the New Testament that a Christian who follows that specific commandment of honoring your father and mother is guaranteed the promise of a long life on earth. I think there are lots of people. There are many children who honor their father and mother. There are many children, and the cancer hospitals are filled with them, of children who, by all accounts, are decent, polite children that are obedient to their parents. And when you read into some of their stories and you look at them, you see that they're some of the most, I won't just say well behaved, because that kind of that almost brings it a notch down, but they're some of the most cheerful people. Many of them have such wonderful attitudes, even though they're in such a horrible position, even though they have such difficulty and turmoil in their lives. Many of them, they at least try to, on the outside, display, love and some piece of joy in their life. And you can see that, even though they may be honoring their father and their mother, that they might not be guaranteed long life on this earth. And so I don't think that these Old Testament, that's one example of an Old Testament promise that just is not something that applies to the church age. At least I don't think you can demonstrate that it does. And so this is another example of an Old Testament promise that, yes, the enemies of God are going to have sharp arrows rain down on them. Potentially in the Old Testament, yes, for Israel, if they were, not straying away from God as a nation, but there's a lot of conditions associated with that. Now, going into verse 5, it says, "Woe is me that I sojourn in Meshech, that I dwell in the tents of Kedar." And so this is, there's a lot that we could dig into this verse, just from some sort of outside guesses at prophecy. We're not going to dig into that too deep this morning. But essentially, note that the tone, note that the idea being conveyed with this verse is you're not at home, you're not in Jerusalem, you're not where you are going. You are still far away, and you have a journey to make. And so here, woe is me that I sojourn in Meshech. You don't even have necessarily a home as a sojourner. That's another reason why these songs, I mentioned they're called Song of Degrees, Songs of Ascension. They're also called the Pilgrim's Psalms. And a pilgrim is somebody who is sojourning. It's somebody who's traveling. It's somebody who's on a journey. It's somebody who is on their way to a place, and it's associated with for some kind of religious purpose. For example, the Puritans of England that left England because they didn't agree with what was going on in England. They didn't agree with what was happening there with the Anglican Church. They left, and they went into Holland, and they were able to worship freely there, but they had an issue that then all their kids decided to stop. They were starting to learn Dutch instead of English, and they were starting to embody more of the Dutch traditions. instead of the English traditions, which the Pilgrims still saw themselves as Englishmen. They still saw themselves as being, of that country of England, and they didn't want their kids to become Dutch. And so they heard about this place. They heard about the New World. They heard about this place where you could go, and so they traveled to North America. And they traveled there so they could escape the persecution of the Anglican Church, and so they could continue to be who they were, continue to have their culture and their own traditions, but to do it freely. And so they're called the Pilgrims because they went on this journey for religious freedom. Now, you could look at other religions. Pilgrim isn't a word that's restricted to Christianity. You can look at Muslims who make a pilgrimage to Mecca. You could look at Buddhists who make a pilgrimage to various temples or various mountaintop shrines. They're making a pilgrimage. So don't just associate that word pilgrim with the Puritans of England from the 1600s. And the ones that met Squanto and Massasoit. There have been plenty of other pilgrims throughout history. Ideally, every Christian on earth is supposed to be a pilgrim. Every one of us. The reason is we're citizens of heaven. That's where our homeland is. That's where we're on our way to. We're sojourners in this earth. This isn't our real home. And so we are on our way to a place. We're pilgrims. And so that's what this verse 5 is really communicating. It's communicating the pilgrimage piece of this. My soul hath long dwelt with him that hateth peace. My soul hath long dwelt with him that hateth peace. And so, again, there are lots of prophetic connotations with these verses. We're not going to look at those this morning. We may double back and look at those some other time. But, imagine a person of Israel who is far from their home, far from Jerusalem, and we know that that Israel rather is not a place that's made up of only the children of Israel. We know that because God gave them clear instructions. Whenever you read through the book of Joshua, they were given clear instructions what were to be done to the heathen, to the Canaanites that were in the land. They were either all supposed to be wiped out or driven out. They were not supposed to remain in that land. Israel was supposed to take that land fully. They weren't supposed to leave heathen people, pagans, in that land to be corrupted later on. And we know from reading the book of Joshua that they did not follow that command. They didn't kill every one of them, and they definitely didn't drive them all out. And so they have these other people groups living among them. And you can imagine that not all of these individual Canaanite tribes are that thrilled with the fact that they're being ruled over. They're being ruled over by people who don't believe the same way as them. They're being ruled over by people who don't have the same traditions as them. Being ruled over by people that in some cases don't speak the exact same language as them. Now they all speak Semitic languages. You can basically get by. I sometimes use the example of somebody who speaks Spanish and somebody who speaks Portuguese. They're different languages, but they're similar enough that you can, if you speak one well enough, you can sort of get by if you understand a few basic rules and vocabulary things. Same thing between the language of the Hebrews and the language of the local Canaanites. They have different things with them, but you could basically make out what each other's saying, but not exactly speaking the same language. And that creates friction. It doesn't go all the way in together. There's friction there. And friction, if there's enough of it, you know what that creates in basic physics? If there's enough friction, there's heat. And what happens when things get too hot? People act up. That's what happens. And so, my soul hath long dwelt with him that hateth peace. That is, and I'm not arguing that it's wrong for the United States to have people in it that don't all exactly believe the 100% exact same thing. That's not what the argument is here. That's not what the purpose of this is here. Even within a church, even within a small church, you're going to have different opinions. You're going to have disagreements. You're going to have people that think one thing about something and people who think another thing about something. I'm sure that throughout the however many years I've been teaching Sunday school, I've said something that somebody has not fully agreed with. And that's okay. That's okay. That's not what we're talking about. The issue that we're talking about here is that foundationally, at the very lowest parts of somebody's beliefs, the very foundations of what makes them who they are, the things that they believe, there are irreconcilable differences. There are irreconcilable differences here between the people of Israel and many of these Canaanite tribes. You cannot bring them together. It's not something that's possible. The only way to do so would be able to do what's often been done in the United States, which is where you give people a focus on something else. You draw them away from those first beliefs, those foundational principles, and you try to point them towards something else. In the United States, often that's something economic or it's something materialistic. We are a country of materialism. Almost everybody can agree, I say almost everybody can agree that it's wonderful to have a big house and a boat in your driveway and 3 or 4 cars and this and that. And whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist, everybody wants to get more stuff. That's kind of how America has been able to bridge that gap. And the problem with that is materialism just is not going to cut it. It's not enough. Because those first order beliefs, those foundational things are still going to be there. And whenever there's too many irreconcilable differences, whenever enough friction happens, things are going to heat up. And it's just not going to work out the way that some of the secularists, some of the humanists, secular humanists might want it to. It just can't work. But my soul hath long dwelt with him that hateth peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. And so I said we weren't going to get into it, and we're not going to get into it too deeply, but just to sort of skim the surface of some of the prophetical things that are going on here, this can potentially deal with some of the issues that the 144,000 deal with in the Great Tribulation, where, or maybe just leading up to the Great Tribulation in the first 3.5-year period of the tribulation, where they're surrounded by people who just do not like them, and so they have to flee, they have to leave, they have to find somewhere, and God leads them to a place of safety where He can provide for them. And so the basic idea is that not only are these psalms the songs of degrees, the songs of ascension, the songs of pilgrimage for the ancient Israelites who went up to Jerusalem for feasts, but they may also be sung by future Jews in the tribulation period who are looking for their place of provision, their place of safety, and they sing it as they are moving their way toward the place that God will protect them. That is speculation. That's not provable. I don't know that I could fully demonstrate that, but that's just speculation that potentially these psalms will be sung by them as they are working their way up. We've taught previously that it's very possible that they will be kept and safe and harbored in a place called Sela Petra, which is in the mountains south of the Dead Sea in the land of the Edomites. And it's an ancient place in the mountains. And so it would still fit sort of this idea that you're ascending, that you're going up into that place. So one final time that I'll repeat this, and I won't repeat it again. That is pure speculation. So do not take that as gospel truth. Do not take that as Leroy knows something more than you do on that, because I don't. I'm just, that's just a guess. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. That's something that we also need to understand, though, as Christians, that I don't think that this can necessarily apply to a Christian, because by the very nature of who we are, by the very nature of the church and of the church age, we are called to be soldiers of Christ. We are called to battle. Now, maybe not physical battle with guns and bayonets and bombs and artillery and planes, even though I believe that God may implore us as a duty to defend our nation in times of war. I don't think that peace should be the default state of mind for a Christian. Every day, Paul says we're supposed to take up the armor of God. Why would you take up the armor and adorn yourself with it if all you expect to do is just live in serenity and peace? We're called to be in a world of spiritual warfare. We're called to share the gospel. We're always consistently under attack by Satan. That's something that is it's just true according to Scripture. And so when the psalmist says, I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war, the implication here is that the ones that are for war are the ones that are bad or are not, they are against God, that what God wants is peace, and what these other groups want is war. And that may be true in this context, that God isn't moving the nations toward all-out war in this time period in the Old Testament. Specifically that time period, because there are other times where he does move nations to all-out war. You just have to look at Assyria. You just have to look at the Chaldeans in Babylon and look at their interactions with Israel and Judah to see that God did move them to war. God did move them to conquer. God did move them in order to judge the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. So you have to look at that very specifically in context there. In today's world, as I mentioned, as Christians, we are not immune to war. We are not immune. It's not something that we have to go seek after. Satan will come right up to our face. Satan, his machinations, his work, his evils, his desires, his plans, they'll meet us on the field of battle. We don't have to go meet them. It comes right to us. The idea is that we're supposed to be prepared as Christians. That's why we put on the armor of God. That's why we do it daily. That's why we should be intentional about it. Because if you think Satan is ever taking a day off from trying to corrupt the church, then you've got the wrong idea about Satan. There are no days off. There aren't any. And just the exact day that you think is going to be a good day to work out, a good day to work out on the things that you want to do, a day that's going to go well, a day that's going to be peaceful and calm, a day that you can just relax. That's the day that something's going to happen that Satan's going to try to use to just twist himself in and try to twist God out. So war is something that it's something that we just have to be prepared for. It's not something that we need to look at as being inherently evil in that sense, because if it were wrong for us to engage in that warfare, God would tell us so. He wouldn't encourage us to be engaged in it. He wouldn't encourage us to fight. Instead, we are called on to be soldiers of God. And so, I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. We have to be very, in today's age, I would suggest being very aware and skeptical of people who just blanket call for peace. Because, again, if you're trying to just blanket establish peace, you're almost ignoring the reasons why there isn't peace, which are those first order values, those first order beliefs that are sometimes just irreconcilable. And so, we have to understand that that's just the human nature, that sin nature that we have as human beings. Sin ultimately is the origin point for these kind of conflicts. Because people don't have themselves oriented properly toward God. Their first fundamental beliefs are set in the wrong direction. And so, that's just the way the world is. That is Psalm 120. Are there any comments or questions on that this morning?